Unless you actually live there, most Americans couldn't tell you 5 things about the state of Wyoming. With its wide open plains and sparsely populated areas, crime isn't much of a worry for its citizens. In fact, the state has only executed one person since 1976, and his name was Mark Hopkinson. As a kid, he seemed to have it all, being a star athlete in multiple sports while also having his way with the ladies. He was deemed by most to be a pretty likable guy, but behind the facade lay a more manipulative and sinister character, one who killed animals for no reason and took nude photos of his female classmates to blackmail them. Mark spoke with a level of conviction that made people do his bidding with no questions asked. So we had a group of low-level thugs that carried out his every desire, as all he had to do was make a call and someone disappeared. Welcome to history's biggest villains. Mark was born on October 8, 1949 in Evanston, Wyoming. He had 3 siblings and he grew up in a small church, subscribing to the Mormon religion. He prayed daily, attended church, and was well liked in the community. From an early age, Mark was very intelligent, but also very cunning and manipulative. Although his father was abusive, Mark was rarely the target of the abuse. He was always able to charm his way out of a beating, even if he really deserved it. Mark was also able to manipulate his parents and grandparents into overlooking basically anything he did, whether it was stealing, bullying, or cheating on a test. In Mark's mind, he was above the rules. He didn't have to abide by restrictions. Orders were beneath him, and he deserved to get everything he wanted. Mark was a great basketball and football player at Bridger Valley High School, as he was the catch for the girls, a role model for the younger boys, and a student that received special treatment from teachers. But Mark also had a dark side beneath the superficial charm he displayed to others. Underneath the positive exterior lay an evil, sadistic, manipulative, and self-serving man who possessed a huge ego and a habit for violence. He was often a troublemaker in school, and he used his charm and smooth talk to avoid any punishment. There were some disturbing tendencies developing early on. He lured unsuspecting young girls into his trailer park. There he would drug them, strip them naked, sexually abuse them, take explicit pictures of them, and then sell the photos to potential buyers or use it against them as blackmail. While it wasn't unusual for young boys in Wyoming to own a gun, Mark wasn't content with simply shooting rocks or beer cans. On one occasion, he shot into a deer that was walking along the side of the road. He didn't kill it for food or even its antlers. He shot the animal just for the fun of it, leaving its body lying in the open to rot away. It wasn't long before Mark began committing petty crimes. At the age of 17, he burglarized several homes, including those of his best friends, taking several guns and truck tires. When he was arrested for the crime, he promised he wouldn't do it again, telling the judge that it was just a silly teenage prank. Mark was eventually released without going to prison. He even managed to win back the trust of his neighbors and friends, who openly welcomed him back into the same homes he had previously robbed. In his senior year of high school, he became the star of Bridger Valley football team, earning an athletic scholarship to the University of Arizona. Not long after, he dropped out of school, later resurfacing in New Hampshire in 1972, where he was arrested for the possession of marijuana, being sentenced to 5 years in prison. As usual, he charmed his way into having his sentence reduced to 3 years. He was released on parole in 1975, and he moved back to Bridger Valley, Wyoming, with his new wife, Judy. Back in Bridger Valley, Mark's father had become involved in a legal battle with neighbors regarding water and property rights. In 1974, Joe Hopkinson had been doing groundwork to build a new trailer complex on his property. However, in the process of this work, Joe had filled in a nearby water trench with dirt. This specific trench provided the neighboring Royce family with their water supply, and when they confronted Joe about this, he refused to do anything. As a result, the Royce family took the Hopkinsons to court for water and land violations, eventually winning a judgment against Joe in 1974. While the case was being appealed, Mark returned to Bridger Valley. When he learned about the dispute, he became infuriated by what he felt was a personal attack on him and his family. Immediately, he established control over his father's trailer development, and he vowed to get even with the Royces for messing with his family. In April of 1976, Mark personally visited the Royce family, concealing his anger by acting very polite and charming. He told them that he was willing to come to a settlement, but he insisted that he be allowed to continue filling the water ditch with dirt. After this offer was obviously rejected, Mark snapped, firing several threats at them, saying that he could very easily inconvenience them if they didn't comply with his demands. But the Royce family stood firm, not giving in to Mark's bullying. They chose to take their case to the Fort Bridger Water Board and force a judgment against the Hopkinsons. On the rainy day of May 6, 1976, Frank Royce and his daughter, Arlene Sweat, were having lunch inside their trailer when he noticed Mark circling their property in his car. Frank walked up to confront him, as he was fed up with being harassed, and he wanted to put an end to the shenanigans. Once the two men got face to face, an argument ensued. "When are you moving that son of a bitch?" yelled Mark, angrily pointing at the Royce's trailer. "It's none of your damn business," replied Frank. "Get that goddamn trailer off my property," Mark snarled. "I'm a mean son of a bitch when I'm mad." "So am I," Frank defiantly sneered. "Bring it on, pal." Itching for a fight, Mark continued this tough guy approach. You mess with me and you're going to find out for yourself. Further egging him on, Frank said, "Oh, I'm not scared. Come and get me." At that moment, Mark's father, Joe, snuck up from behind and struck Frank on the back of the head with a hammer. As he fell to the ground, Mark leaned over and continued to beat him. Seeing her father in danger, Arlene grabbed a shovel and raced outside. The small, pregnant woman barely confronted the 6'1" Mark and swung a shovel at him, but he simply punched her in the stomach, knocking her over. She got up and fought back, distracting him long enough for Frank to scramble away and call for help. As Joe ran back to the trailer park, Mark began to unleash his rage on the pregnant Arlene, brutally beating her across the face, mouth, arm, back, and stomach. After he was done, he simply walked off the property, loudly swearing and screaming insults at the battered woman. Both Arlene and Frank tried to file charges against Mark for assault, but the county attorney, Jim Phillips, who was friends with Mark, refused to grant their request. Even worse, he refused to take their side on the water trench lawsuit that had started the whole thing. After Phillips refused to help the Royces, Mark believed that he now had free reign over the disputed land, and he began to finish building his trailer park. He wanted to hook up all the sewer lines in the area up to his own district, but there was a problem. Many of these lines were located in a separate sewer district, one that the Hopkinsons didn't own. No big deal, thought Mark. He would simply buy the property and integrate it into his own district. But Frank Royce wanted to make sure that someone would put a stop to Mark's behavior. And since the county attorney wouldn't help him, he turned to local lawyer Vincent Vihar. Vincent knew all about Mark, as he had prosecuted both him and his father in the past. And Vihar also knew that Mark was an aggressive, egotistical, and vindictive psychopath who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Vihar took the Royce's legal complaint to the Fort Bridger Water Board, along with a public petition to stop Mark from integrating the sewer district. After several extensive negotiations, the board ruled in Mark's favor. He could buy and use the land, but it would cost him 3 times the normal hookup fee to do so. Although he was upset over the potential cost, he agreed to the settlement. For most normal people, the issue would have ended here, but of course, Mark Hopkinson wasn't a normal person. After the settlement, Mark started hooking up the sewer lines to his new trailer park, but in direct violation to the agreement, he openly refused to pay the $12,300 hookup fee once the construction work was finished. But the water board was at its wit's end. They pressed the matter, warning Mark that he would face legal action if he didn't pay the money he owed. Soon, both the Royces and members of the water board began receiving death threats and constant harassment. Mark followed board members in his car and stalked them day in and day out. When they would return home, they often found that someone had shot holes in their windows with a BB gun. Others opened their doors to find threatening notes on their doorsteps. Finally, during weeks of harassment, the members of the water board filed a lawsuit against Mark on January 28, 1977. Representing the plaintiffs was attorney Vincent Vihar. The lawsuit sought to force Mark to pay the $12,300 he owed, plus another $50,000 for harassing the Royce family and members of the water board. But Mark wasn't going to give in. After trying and failing to have the lawsuit against him dismissed, he began plotting a much more nefarious scheme. If he couldn't defeat Vincent Vihar in court, then he would simply send him into early retirement. He was convinced that the lawsuit against him wouldn't be so strong if Vincent wasn't on it, so he began to plot his murder. However, Mark knew very well that it would be very suspicious if the attorney who was pressing charges against him suddenly turned up dead. He had to make sure he wouldn't be considered a suspect. If Vincent Vihar was to die, Mark knew he couldn't personally kill him. He needed an alibi for the time of the murders. Mark turned to one of his employees, a 21-year-old man named Jeff Green, to carry out the job. He was a troubled, impressionable young man, the perfect bait for a manipulative psychopath like Mark. He had grown up as a social outcast, and he regarded Mark as his best friend, trusting him like a brother, so he had no qualms about following his orders. Mark also talked with 2 of Green's friends, Mike Hickey and Jamie Highsell, 2 local drunkards who had criminal records for petty theft and drug dealing. These were 2 extremely upstanding members of the community, as a year before, Mike had kidnapped, raped, murdered, and sexually mutilated a 15-year-old girl named Kelly Wickheis. This was on Jamie's orders after Kelly made a statement to police against him that resulted in a marijuana possession charge. Together, Mark, Jeff, James, and Mike all plotted to kill Vincent Vihar. The plan was to plant a bomb in the basement of his home in Evanston and detonate it, killing the entire family in a large explosion. They hoped that the explosion would be blamed on a gas leak and that the police would be sidetracked for months before they could ever tie the crime to Mark. While the police were distracted, the water board's case against him would fail, and then Mark could use his government connections to cover his tracks. Sounds like a foolproof idea. In return for helping build the bomb, Mark promised to pay the other members $2,000 each, also promising to help Highsell and Hickey cover up their involvement in Kelly's murder, as her body hadn't been found yet. Because Mike was an experienced killer, he was chosen to plant the bomb. On August 1st, 1977, Mark was informed that he would be deposed by Vihar in court on the 9th as part of the water board's lawsuit against him. On the night of August 6th, he met with Mike at a local bar. It was time, he said, to carry out the murders, as he ordered Mike to blow up the house that night. Mike then drove from Fort Bridger to Evanston. bringing with him a large bomb made from 30 sticks of dynamite. The device was crudely made, but powerful, containing enough explosive material to demolish an entire building. At about 3:30 a.m. in the morning of August 7th, he arrived at the Vihar's family home at 430 12th Street in Evanston. Inside the house slept Vincent Vihar, his wife Beverly, and his two sons, 18-year-old John and 20-year-old Tony. Walking around to the back of the house, Mike waited for a minute to ensure no one was watching him. Then he lit a 1-minute fuse on the bomb and dropped it through the open window of the house's basement. He then got into his car and sped off. About 5 minutes later, a loud, deafening, and fiery explosion blasted through the quiet suburb of Evanston, jolting sleeping residents awake. Windows on several nearby houses shattered and pieces of timber ripped through neighboring bedrooms. No one knew what had just happened, as some thought it was an earthquake, while others assumed that there had been a car accident. Jim Dean, who lived just around the corner from the VR home, later recalled seeing a bright flash and feeling his entire house shake. Rushing outside, he saw a cloud of black smoke in the area where the VR house used to be. When the smoke cleared, the young boy could hardly believe what he was seeing. The house had been completely leveled and blasted to shreds. In Dean's words, the home looked as if someone had picked it up and turned it inside out. Police and emergency services arrived within minutes to the scene. A suffocating cloud of hot ash, smoke, and pulverized insulation still hung in the air, choking those who came nearby. Evanston Police Officer Randy Hobson was among the first to arrive at the scene. Examining the blast site, he could hardly believe his eyes. The entire house had been blown to pieces. Not one wall remained standing. The only recognizable piece of the house was a smoldering chair that lay atop a pile of rubble. There was no way anyone could have survived the blast, he thought. There was literally nothing left. So Hobson was very surprised to hear a muffled voice calling out for help from beneath the smoking rubble. "Hey, I'm over here. Here, I'm over here," yelled the voice. It belonged to Vincent's oldest son, Tony. Incredibly, he hadn't only survived the explosion, but it wasn't even the blast that startled him. It was the smoke. Tony had woken up, coughing, as smoke filled his lungs, and only then did he realize that his entire house had collapsed. Tony felt a stinging pain in his arm and smelled the metallic, copper-like odor of blood, but he had no idea how badly he was injured. Officer Hodson scrambled over the rubble to find Tony. "Hang on, fella," he yelled. "I'm coming." He found Tony pinned under the rubble, unable to move. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "I think so. I'm bleeding badly." "Was there anyone else in the house?" Hodson asked. "Yeah," replied Tony. "The rest of my family." Police scanned the rubble for Vincent, Beverly, and John, but they couldn't find any trace of them. The priority now was to free Tony and get him to the hospital. Rescue workers spent 45 minutes sawing through rubble and moving aside pieces of debris before Tony could finally be extracted. He was badly bruised and cut, suffering eardrum damage, glass cuts to his eyes, burns all over his body, along with lung and throat damage from smoke inhalation. Although gravely injured, Tony survived his wounds and eventually made a full recovery. As they continued to search the ruined house, police found the family's dog and cat, petrified and badly shaken, but alive. They too were removed from the scene, but no one else from the family would be so lucky. Ever the master manipulator, Mark finessed his own hitman. After the bombing, he decided that it would be best that he and Mike not be seen together. As a result, Mike never received the $2,000 he was promised for the job. And while Mark probably thought that this method of attack would save him from legal consequences, he was sorely mistaken. The hopes of this being declared as a gas leak accident were quickly dashed, as within a day, ATF investigators determined that the blast at the Vihar home was caused by a bomb, and police soon learned of Vincent's connection to the Hopkinson case in Fort Bridger. As a result, Mark quickly became the prime suspect in the bombing. Stay tuned. On Tuesday, I will be dropping part 2 to this story. Stay tuned. It gets really crazy from here. But thank you. Please be safe. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.